Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 212 and I am the show's host, Kyle. On today's show, we resume the conversation that I had with Joanne, Leon, and Dan Wright, co-hosts of the Around the Empire podcast, and we're breaking down Russiagate. As I said, this is part 2 of a 3-part series, so if you didn't catch Monday's episode 211, I would suggest going back and doing that because there's a lot of information in that episode that will apply to this one. In this show, we really cover the FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, codenamed Crossfire Hurricane, and then what they believe the role of John Brennan in all of this is, and we also discuss Peter Strzok here as well. For those of you who like to share the show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com and libertarianinstitute.org. This is episode 54 of Around the Empire for those of you who want to check that out. And again, it'll be linked in the show notes page. But this is a FBI operation. They titled it Crossfire Hurricane, and they were trying to get into the Trump administration. Yeah, so supposedly Crossfire Hurricane was the initial explanation of it was that George Papadopoulos, who was a very junior campaign volunteer. So this is a very weird story. He met with Alexander Downer. Now, Alexander Downer is the Australian High Commissioner, which is like the ambassador to the UK. So he's the Australian ambassador to the UK. And this meeting, supposedly Papadopoulos told Alexander Downer that he was aware of emails that Hillary Clinton emails, that were very damaging toward her. And he supposedly got these emails or found out about these emails from this Maltese professor named Mifsud. Now, some of these things have not held up over time, but supposedly this is what got the FBI. This is what caused them to create an internal investigation called Crossfire Hurricane, and they got informants to try to get through to the Trump campaign. And I don't know, where do you want to take it from there? It's sort of...
Well, it's also important to note that Downer is like a Clinton friend and colleague. And it's not clear exactly if what was said. That's the other thing. He sort of notified the FBI. It's one of the reasons his timelines don't make a lot of sense, because it's not clear what exactly he even told the FBI and whether he said anything about dirt, or whether, right, even the sort of underlying theory is that basically the narrative the FBI is weaving is, well, he let it slip. Papadopoulos let it slip that he knew about the DNC hack, right? And that's how we knew, because he let it slip. But what seems to have happened is that he made a kind of benign statement, or that Papadopoulos said essentially that we have dirt on Clinton, or the Russians might have dirt on Clinton. Downer notified the FBI, and then the FBI essentially tried to infiltrate. They tried to infiltrate the Trump campaign 2 times. One with this operative Stefan Halper, who is a CIA connected government consultant. Halper was also, by the way, part of quote unquote DebateGate or Briefing-Gate, which was a political scandal affecting, I'm first from Wikipedia right now, a political scandal affecting the administration of Ronald Reagan. It took place in the final days of the 1980 presidential election. Reagan's team had somehow acquired President Jimmy Carter's briefing papers, classified as top secret. And Stefan Halper was part of that scandal.
So he has experience in meddling with elections, for what it's worth. For the CIA. Yeah.
Stefan Halper, a campaign aide who handled the communications for Bush and provided news updates and policy ideas to the traveling Ronald Reagan, was in charge of the operation. Halper called the report that he was from the New York Times, of all places, just absolutely untrue, quote unquote. So Halper's a DC figure. He's got shady. I mean, he's talking to the FBI. He's acting as an FBI informant. Now, President Trump has said he was a spy.
And the thing that makes it so explosive is that, Trump's been saying they're spying on my campaign. They're spying on my campaign. Everybody calls that a conspiracy theory. That's crazy.
Paranoid.
And all that. And then it turns out, just the whole idea that the FBI is spying on a presidential campaign, in my view, I take it to another level and I say, there's a major surveillance apparatus in the United States. it's a huge thing, and it's it's an instrument of power that's so big it's almost unimaginable. And for an administration and the opposing party who clearly supports the Clinton campaign to use that apparatus on the opposing candidate, the opponent candidate, I mean, that's a really big deal.
Yeah, regardless of what you think of Trump. And also it's a dangerous precedent, which of course Trump can now use, and he'll justify it by saying they spied on me. But it's important to note here that Halper is talking to Carter Page and Papadopoulos, both of whom are working for the Trump campaign, and he's talking to Carter Page while there's a wiretap on Carter Page. So Carter Page is both having his communications intercepted by U.S. intelligence, and there is an FBI informant actively talking to him and relaying those conversations back to this task force, the Crossfire Hurricane task force. So, I mean, Carter Page is under double surveillance here. Papadopoulos, he says Halper is trying to talk to him about these Clinton emails that makes him uncomfortable. So the FBI has put in, as part of Crossfire Hurricane, has both engaged in wiretaps on U.S. citizens and put an FBI informant, at least one. There may be others. There's rumors of others, but we have one confirmed, Stefan Halper, to try to essentially, I mean, you want to call him an informant, but the activity he was engaging in was spying on the campaign. He's pumping Papadopoulos and Carter Page for information about the Trump campaign.
Well, Carter Page has a history, right? And I know you said you wanted to bring him up. So, maybe this is a good time to get into that history.
Yeah.
I want to just bring something else up. The reason why this is hard to talk about is that some of this stuff has not held up. And there are details coming out all the time. Like, for example, Downer, again, he's the ambassador in Australia. There's a lot of things stirring up right now. Part of it, let me just mention that Downer gave an interview to it's called The Australian. And he said, I'll quote him here. He says, Papadopoulos didn't say dirt. He said material that could be damaging to her. He didn't say what it was. And these are fragmented quotes from him. And nothing he said in that conversation indicated Trump himself had been conspiring with the Russians to collect information on Hillary Clinton. So this contradicts the whole explanation by the FBI, for starters. Like, he didn't say anything about emails, right? And the other part that
the guy he's talking to didn't say anything about the DNC emails. He said he may have said something generally about those emails that were missing in the news, right? The Hillary Clinton server.
Yeah,
that may have been what that guy was talking about. Masood.
Yeah, I think I have something here. Papadopoulos' wife, again, she says that he was referring to something that had been in the news recently. I think the deleted Hillary Clinton emails from her server. So it's now confusing. Like, these things fall apart all the time. And the other thing that's falling apart is how this information about this conversation made its way back to Washington and back to the FBI. And there were some conflicting accounts about that too. And that's in the news right now because of a Victoria Nuland testimony in a congressional hearing. The State Department, it looks like the State Department was involved in this now.
Christopher Steele, we should note that, did brief the State Department. So here's this opposition researcher for Hillary Clinton briefing the State Department. Victoria Nuland said, who was the Assistant Secretary of Eastern European Affairs. She was also a big part of the Ukrainian coup story, which let's not go into that at the moment. But she said both she opted out for the meeting and she didn't know about it. So if you can figure out how you can agree not to go to a meeting you don't know about, please let me know, because it seems to disrupt the space-time continuum. But in any case,
there's another really important detail here is that this meeting happened on May 10th, 2016. So Crossfire Hurricane, this FBI investigation supposedly didn't start until July 31st. But a lot of these activities are happening months before, and it very much looks like they're already spying on Trump at this point.
Yeah, the timeline of Crossfire Hurricane and what the involvement was of Obama administrative officials, particularly John Brennan, CIA director, is is really interesting once we get these timelines nailed down, because some people have clearly been lying about what they were doing and when they were doing it. So we might eventually figure that out. Just to get on to Carter Page. So Carter Page is a former. I mean, he used to work with he worked with the FBI. He's a Russia specialist, or at least he was. He was, he says he's a petroleum industry consultant. He at one time worked for J.P. Morgan. He was a vice president. He worked in Russia, and he says, who did he work for? I think he's an investment banker, foreign policy analyst. He was approached before to try to be recruited by Russian intelligence. He cooperated with the FBI to get against the Russian, to help to get these Russian intelligence agents to recruit him in trouble.
He handed over some binders to them that had microphones planted in them, and that helped take down this Russian spy ring. And Carter Page, he didn't know that the people who were approaching him, he didn't even realize he was being recruited. You know what I mean?
This is years ago. This is not during the 2016 election. So Carter Page has a relationship with the FBI. So for him to be surveilled so much is strange, because he apparently was an FBI informant himself. He's a PhD, and he also is one of the people. He's kind of a weird guy if you've ever seen him interviewed, which is, for some reason, he's agreeing to do interviews, which if he has any legal advice, it would be to stay off TV and stop giving these interviews.
Actually, I think that his interviews, he probably has spoken more than anybody else who's been caught up in this thing. And, he's very open. He's gone on TV a lot of times, and unlike some of the other guys who made fools of themselves, the other people sort of tangentially connected to the Trump campaign, like that Sam Nunberg and all that. It was a disaster. The Carter Page interviews were not a disaster, and I think he's one of the few who did himself, who ended up is better off for having done those interviews. But
in any case, he hasn't been indicted. That's an important point here. Here's a guy who was under FBI surveillance. They had an FBI informant, Stefan Halper, talking to him, and Mueller has not charged him with anything. Which you would think, if there was one person he's the most focused on. So the FBI has multiple. They've gone to the FISA court at least 2 times that we know about to put him under surveillance during this 2016 period, right? He's got an FBI informant talking to him, Stefan Halper, and they have no charges. What gives? I mean, if there's any cog in the machine of Russiagate collusion, it's got to be Carter Page. They've got him under surveillance. They've got spies talking to him, and there's still no indictment. I mean, that's what's strange to me.
Yeah,
it looks
a whole lot more. They're like they needed a justification for having gotten the FISA, having started to spy on the campaign.
Well, and it seems very strange that, if you're the FBI and from James Comey and what he said about how he wanted to impact the election with how he handled the Hillary Clinton investigation, he wanted to make as little, political waves as possible. Here you have a guy who was formerly an FBI informant and who was very willing to work with the FBI. And rather than, just attempt to reach out to him, if you think there's anything suspicious going on, you wiretap him and send informants to try to, see what's going on with him. And so it's, it seems like you're definitely not taking, the path that will keep you away from getting involved in the election as much as possible here.
Right. And you've got an FBI informant who is talking to Carter Page and openly trying to get information from Papadopoulos. You've got a wiretap up. You've got an on-run. I mean, if you're not trying to interfere with the election, why are you gathering all this information? What's the point? Why do you care so much? I mean, plus there's still no, they had this big intelligence operation, and they're getting Paul Manafort, who is not, hiding, having clandestine meetings in London or wherever, but is actually running the campaign, and they've got him for tax charges. Now, maybe that's to pressure him to roll on other figures. They're also, of course, investigating Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, but Mueller says there's nothing there related to Russiagate, so he hands that case off to the New York, Attorney General, or rather, U.S. Attorney. So they're all over the Trump campaign. They're all over the officials, and they still don't have a actual direct charge.
That might not be the only reason why they handed it off to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, because Trump can't pardon people that are indicted by or convicted by the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan. I guess he can.
Yes, he can. He can pardon anyone for federal charges. He can't.
You know what? You know what I'm thinking of?
They handed it to the New York Attorney General of the state of New York. He couldn't pardon because that would be a state crime, not a federal crime.
You know, what I'm thinking of is that Schneiderman, who was the New York, he was the Attorney General of New York.
For a minute.
He was. He claimed that they were going to pass a law that would prevent Trump from pardoning. That's what it was. But of course, he's been taken down by the Me Too campaign because it turns out he was
beating up his girlfriends for some reason, which is its own creepy side. But anyway, that's a side issue. So in any case, they're all over the Trump campaign. They're saying they don't want to, we don't want to interfere, but they've got wiretaps up. They've got FBI informants. They're dealing with a guy who's doing opposition research for the other campaign. Christopher Steele is contracted by the Hillary Clinton campaign, and they're sharing information with him. He's briefing the State Department. He's working with the FBI, and they only cut him off. They're working with him. They're paying him, as far as I understand it. The only reason they cut him off is because he breaks an agreement not to leak to the press, which, of course, is hilarious from the FBI. I guess the FBI wanted to be the ones to leak to the press. But in any case, for people, you're right. For people, Kyle, you make a good point here. For people who are trying not to interfere, they're sure interfering a lot.
And as it turns out, now we have some, because of the IG report and because the FBI has released these texts about the key lead investigator and the counsel, the lawyer who's actually Andrew McCabe's lawyer, people who are the key people in this investigation are extremely, extremely biased. And they pretty much admit that they are working against the Trump campaign. And we have a whole bunch of texts.
Lisa Page and Peter Strzok.
There's Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Lisa Page is Andrew McCabe's counsel, and Peter Strzok is the lead investigating FBI agent on this.
And was part of the Mueller probe before these texts became information, when then Mueller kicked him off. And now apparently he has been he was escorted out of the FBI building last week, and he has had his security clearance revoked. I'm guessing they're going to fire him, although I'm not sure exactly for what. I don't think having an extramarital affair and being politically biased is necessarily grounds for termination, but I don't know. But yes, they hate Trump, fair enough, and they're saying on U.S. government devices how much they hate Trump while they're carrying out their extramarital affair. And so it's fodder for people who, and decent fodder, I guess, for people who think that there was bias in the FBI against Trump. But yes, Peter Strzok is one of the leaders of this counter. Remember, this is not a criminal investigation initially. Crossfire Hurricane is not a criminal investigation initially. It is a counterintelligence investigation.
Yeah, that's important.
That's very important. So it's not looking to indict people. It's looking to, in theory, stop a foreign intelligence operation. And now Strzok is going from participating in that Crossfire Hurricane to the Mueller probe, which is about criminal investigation
and maybe even more. He was the lead investigator on the Clinton email campaign, the codenamed the mid-year exam, which is going on right up until July of 2016, and then it gets reopened again in October
with the Anthony Weiner stuff.
So it's the same players.
So Operation Mid-Year Exam is the Clinton investigation, which is a criminal investigation. And then Operation Crossfire Hurricane is happening right after that. And Peter Strzok goes from the Clinton investigation, where she's let off the hook, to the Trump investigation. And in the course of that investigation and his extramarital affair with Lisa Page is saying in text messages that you can read now, they're part of the public record, I hate Trump. I hate Trump supporters. They smell.
We need an insurance policy.
You need an insurance policy. At one point, Lisa Page says, please tell me Trump's not going to win. Right. And Peter Strzok says, no, he's not going to win. Don't worry. We're going to stop him, which of course is going to be.
And this happens on August 8th, which is 8 days after supposedly the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was launched. So, she says to him, he's not going to win. Right. And he says, no, he's not. We'll stop it. Right, and
that's bias, right?
Yeah, and there's another important thing about, this particular text is if you had to point to one single thing, this is the one thing that may take down all of these investigations. Not only does it state intent to try to meddle with an election, or at least meddle with with the Trump campaign, but the other thing is that this particular text was not disclosed by the FBI. It was left out of the batch that they gave. And Horowitz, who's the Inspector General who's looking into all this, he only gets this very recently. And in the congressional hearings, they talk about this. And they ask him, well, why do you think this one was left out? Because they actually got the one where Lisa Page says he's not going to win, right? And so they do give that actual, but they don't give the response, the Peter Strzok's response. Now, the explanation is right now, well, first of all, Horowitz says he had to use military technology to get this text. So because it wasn't in the batch that was handed over, they actually get the devices, and they find a file on the device, and they do a comparison, and that's how they actually get this. And Horowitz says that he thinks there's a technical reason to explain this, but basically no one believes that. Nobody believes it. So that's just another interesting thing about that particular text.
So there's a technical reason they never showed that this investigator was saying, yeah, we're going to stop him.
And they happened to scrub that one.
Whoops.
It was not scrubbed purposely. It was scrubbed because of some technical glitch.
Oh, yeah, technical problem. All right.
Yeah, nobody believes it.
Joanne, I thought you had a pretty interesting conversation with Garland Nixon about kind of what this could mean for the FBI if it turns out that, Peter Strzok here is, obviously a dishonest character, what that could mean for all the cases that he was, investigating or in some way involved with, right?
Yeah, Garland has had a long career in law enforcement. And in fact, he headed up the investigations division for whichever department he worked for. And what he points out is that when something like this happens with a police officer, if they're found to be corrupt, what generally happens is they go back and they go through all of that policeman's cases, for whatever length of time, and they end up having to throw out the charges. And, he thinks that just the exposition of what Strzok and Page did here just undermines the credibility of the FBI so much that the Mueller campaign, the Mueller indictments, he thinks are in danger. They're not going to hold up. So, and you could take it further. It really could undermine the credibility of the whole FBI.
Which is already having problems. We did an episode, God, not so long ago, about I think it was a Time or Newsweek article about how a lot of the court cases where an FBI testimony is being less believed, and that public opinion is slowly turning against the FBI, or they're losing a lot of support from their traditional people who did support them. In the case, it's usually people of the right who had more, I guess, respect for law enforcement, quote unquote, who are now, of course, Trump supporters who are losing respect for the FBI. So the FBI is in a lot of trouble, and Peter Strzok is not helping them out at all right now.
You know what else is relevant is that when the FBI interviews people, first of all, there's no recording. This is by policy. It's been questioned and, discussed many times over the years, but there's no video or audio recording of that interview. What happens is the FBI agent then writes up a report, and he writes down what you said in your testimony. And it goes into a report. I think it's called a 302 report.
Right.
And some members of Congress are beginning to question. They want the 302 reports from some of the Mueller indictment interviews, and there are allegations of them having been modified. I don't know much about it other than that.
Which is exactly why you wouldn't have it recorded, because it'd be harder to manipulate a recording.
Yeah, exactly. But it's another sort of, I don't know how far they were going to get with that whole 302 thing, because there are some indications that Flynn might rescind his guilty plea. So
now, Now, Strzok was involved with the Hillary investigation as well. Could this be, I don't know, I'm sure everyone put it past Donald Trump at least calling for them to possibly, say that investigation was illegitimate just because, he obviously had a pro-Hillary bias here.
Well, Strzok interviewed Flynn. He's the one who did that interview.
Oh, okay.
So he wrote up that 302 on the Flynn interviews. And now his reputation is, did Strzok
say that he didn't think Flynn committed perjury?
Apparently, yeah. You know what else Strzok said?
There's something really smelly about this whole Flynn indictment.
Well, there's another thing. I don't have the particular text in front of me, but at the point in time when they were staffing up the Mueller campaign.
Investigation. It feels like a campaign.
Sorry, yeah. Lisa Page and Strzok, I'm afraid that I'm going to say something that's not accurate here. But basically, they were talking about whether or not he should sign on to the Mueller investigation. And Strzok says he doesn't think he's going to do that because there's no there. Here we go. Let me just let me look this up for you so that I get it right. Ron Johnson. So this comes from there's a message dated May 17th, 2017. You and I both know the odds are nothing. If I thought it was likely, I'd be there, no question. I hesitate in part because my gut sense and concern that there's no big there. So Strzok.
This is about Russiagate?
Yes. No, on the Mueller investigation.
Wait. Just to be clear here, Peter Strzok has said in text form that he thinks the whole Russia collusion investigation, there's no there.
Well, we can't be sure exactly what he's referring to, but it sure looks that way.
I was going to say, wow.
But that's what he said. I mean, what else could it mean?
Well, he's going to testify next week, right? I guess unless he takes the 5th. So I guess we'll find out. Well, provided he doesn't take the 5th or just gets extremely evasive, maybe we'll have some information on what he's saying. But so he's there's a lot going on with him. Let's put it that way. So he's part of Crossfire Hurricane. He's part of this IG report, which is not at all flattering. And I'm not sure what's going to happen in his career. He's, like I said, he's apparently been removed from the office. He was transferred, this is important to note, from counterintelligence to human resources, which is kind of I guess that's a transfer where they're trying to tell you to quit. Like, the transfer to Antarctica or something. Like, you went from leading counterintelligence investigations to human resources. Why don't you go ahead and pick that little box up and put your things in it? So he's now been let out of the building, and his security clearance has been revoked, which of course means he can't do counterintelligence ever again. If he doesn't have a security clearance, that's a big deal. And of course, having your security clearance revoked, this goes to Joanne's point, that's a big deal within the investigative world. I would wonder if there isn't something else coming down the pike that could actually lead to them going back into his old cases and revisiting some of his 302s and other documentary evidence and going, we're not sure we can trust what this guy touches, that it's legitimate.
Yeah. Is there anything else on Strzok that you think we should touch on before moving on?
There's so much there. There's so much there, and there's so much more to come. That's the problem with Russiagate.
Right.
There's oceans of datum and information. It's just so much there. But so that's all I have at the moment. We'll see what his testimony brings before Congress.
Now, something that we were talking about before we start recording was just as far as Crossfire Hurricane goes, is the actual informant, Halpert, is now gone. That this was like a strange development that I just heard.
Yeah, nobody can find him. The press has obviously been looking to talk to him. He disappeared basically after he was exposed. He was exposed by... apparently a lot of people knew, but it was the Daily Caller, which is a DC-based conservative publication. I think the editor-in-chief is still Tucker Carlson or the owner. But in any case, they finally published his name, although the New York Times had a story that it did everything but name him. It gave him like his entire background, where he worked, everything but actually putting his name out there. And once the Daily Caller put out his name, it seems like he's off the grid. Nobody knows where he is. He hasn't done any interviews that I'm aware of. Where is he? I would love to have him testify or at least hear something from him about what's going on. But yeah, he's kind of disappeared. He's out of pocket. I don't know where he is. No one apparently knows where he is.
I believe the same is true of Mifsud too. He's vanished.
Yeah, he's in the wind. He's in the wind, as they say in the intelligence world. He's in the wind. He's off the grid.
And if you remember, Steele also disappeared when his name was published. He disappeared for, I don't know, a couple of months or weeks for some period.
Yeah, but he came back into circulation. I mean, he came back to work, and he was basically, but he went off the grid, I guess, initially, and then he came back. Stefan Halper hasn't come back
for a while. I'm trying to find the exact date, but he's been gone for, I think, like months, many months.
Wow. So in the Crossfire Hurricane episode, you both talked about what you think John Brennan's role in this whole thing is, and so maybe that's a good time to get into Brennan.
Oh boy. Oh boy, my favorite guy.
Well, Brennan admits that he had, intelligence on Trump or, suspicions, and that he passed information over to the FBI. And it appeared that he was driving this whole thing. I mean, he actually goes and he says, does he admit that he actually briefed Congress, and he triggered Harry Reid to write 2 letters to James Comey saying, you better open an investigation. You better do a Trump-Russia investigation.
Right. I mean, Brennan is extremely partisan, and he hates Trump, as he's now made clear on Twitter. He tweeted Trump today that he's hates this guy. But more to the point, he also has a burning hatred for Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn was the head of the DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, and produced a report slamming the Syria strategy and saying that this was actually going to empower jihadists and sort of reactionary Sunni Muslims in Syria and that arming them, that the U.S. was risking arming the next Al-Qaeda or the next people to attack America. This deeply undercut Brennan's policy as CIA director, who was part of the arming the jihadist program, or the moderate rebels, quote unquote.
It was referred to in a Hirsch article as Brennan's baby.
Brennan's baby.
Yeah.
Right. So Brennan and Flynn have a personal feud, and Brennan was instrumental in getting Flynn fired by Obama. So I'm sure the fact that Michael Flynn was aligned with Trump did not make John Brennan particularly happy. And as we learned from John Kiriakou, who was the torture whistleblower who went to jail, a CIA officer who blew the whistle on the torture program and went to jail for releasing classified information. The only one to go to jail for the torture program, by the way, the guy who blew the whistle on it, says, John Brennan is this political animal and he thinks, and I concur, that a lot of this is Brennan's work. That's the rumor around D.C. Cy Hirsch is another person who says so. This, Crossfire Hurricane and this whole operation has a real John Brennan feel to it, and that's why he was always my suspect number one for the leak of that intercept between the Russian ambassador and Flynn. And also, we now know, thanks to news reports coming out, that he was actually talking to Democratic operatives and Democratic elected officials in the case of Harry Reid, telling them about Trump's quote unquote Russia connections. So a lot of this, and he was of course in contact with the Clinton campaign, which is to say probably in contact with Steele. He certainly knew about Steele. Steele was an MI6 person. The MI6 and CIA they're the twins, right? The MI6 is the CIA equivalent. So I think we still haven't heard anything yet, but we may at some point see that John Brennan was the driving force behind what would become Russiagate. That's my theory on it. I look for more facts to be revealed about it, but that is my theory on it. I think Joanne largely concurs with that.
Yeah, I definitely do. There's also, other incidental things like Brennan's counterpart at MI6 resigned very abruptly and unexpectedly after Trump was elected, after he took office, I think. We can look up the actual date on that. There's also a Cy Hirsch telephone call recorded, and Cy Hirsch has since said, "Oh, that was just gossip and all this," but he never denies the authenticity of it. And he basically says that Brennan was the ringleader, and it was Brennan, Clapper, and Comey driving this whole Russiagate thing, and that it's nonsense. Which by that time I had already thought so myself, so it was just sort of like compounded my already held beliefs.
Oh yeah, I think we were both thinking it was Brennan well before the Cy Hirsch interview came out.
That interview that we did with John Kiriakou was like a month after the election, Dan. And we were already.
Yeah, Kiriakou confirmed it because he actually knew John Brennan, and John Brennan is the one who recommended him be prosecuted for talking about the torture program. But we were already like, man, John Brennan really seems like the culprit. Then he said it, and now every single piece of information that's come out has only strengthened my conviction on John Brennan being one of the main drivers of Russiagate, quote unquote Russiagate.
And the other thing is sort of circumstantial. John Brennan, it took him a long time to get that job. And it was a rocky path to get that job. When one of the things that we talked to Kiriakou about was during the 2008 election, Brennan was an early supporter of Barack Obama. And when Obama was elected, Brennan was rumored to be his pick for the CIA director at that point in time. He was supposed to get that job. And, things came up about his involvement with the torture program, or at the very least his that he didn't make any objections to it. He was a high level at a high level in the CIA at the time.
Yeah, he was part of it. He pretended he wasn't part of it, and it seemed to he was tainted enough by the torture program where he didn't get the appointment, but not enough to the point where he was so radioactive he couldn't be thought of later. He kind of got lightly tainted by it.
Which is amazing what 8 years makes there, because now Gina Haspel walks right in.
And he endorsed her, by the way. But so, he was supposed to get that job, and then he got passed over.
Give her an enhanced endorsement.
He got passed over, and then it came time for Obama's second term. And at that point, a weird thing had happened. They didn't want Petraeus to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think is what the story is. And so because they didn't want him to get that job, they let him choose what job he wanted. And he said he wanted to be head of the CIA. And then, he wasn't in that job for very long before the FBI basically took him down, went into his Google emails, that whole sex scandal with his mistress and all that.
Right. Now, to be clear, though, in Petraeus' case, he was not in trouble or prosecuted for extramarital affair. He was prosecuted not even for lying. I think actually lying to investigators was part of it. He was prosecuted for sharing classified information with, what was her name, Paula Broadwell, who was his biographer. He apparently kept notes when he was running the Iraq War and had shared them with her, which included classified names, undercover agents. He gave her all this classified information and only got basically a slap on the wrist.
Yeah. But what he did get was fired. He had to resign. And who followed him? John Brennan. That's when John Brennan finally got, the job that he really wanted. And so he's only been in that job for he was only in that job, I think, for 3 years. And he loved that job. He wanted to keep that job or maybe even get a better job.
And probably would have in a Clinton administration.
And he's known to be a political chameleon. He sucks up to whoever's going to be in power. And
I wish you put that one little biographical note in there that he was originally kicked off Middle Eastern Task Force, an anti-terrorism task force, and was about to get let go from the CIA until he found a job as a presidential briefer with George Tenet, which is a total political job because all you're doing is interfacing with the White House. And so Brennan's career path was political after that. He was not running analysis or clandestine operations, or he was one of the political animals, one of the people interfacing with the elected officials. And that's how he slowly worked his way up. And he's been political for a long time. And I'm sure you don't get that high up. You don't go from the low rung to the high rung without knowing how to help your clients. And I'm sure when he was thinking, wow, I want Hillary Clinton to give me a nice job in the next administration, maybe I should do her some favors.
Yeah, Dan, I think again, this is circumstantial, but that makes a lot of sense. Also, Brennan's got, a string of disasters. And his most recent disaster at this very point in time is Syria. It's not going well. It's really going badly. Plus, it's starting to be exposed that, weapons and support from Brennan's regime change operation are getting to Al-Qaeda and to ISIS.
Thanks to Mike Flynn.
Yeah.
And his DIA report that's been leaked. Or I think the DIA report came through a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, it was written
Judicial
in
Watch.
Judicial Watch, right, yeah. So Michael Flynn's report is helping to damage Brennan even more.
And I mean, that report is really damning because in there, Flynn says this could create an Islamic caliphate, and it ends up happening. And if you remember way back, the Obama administration was trying to downplay the role of ISIS. And so, man, this must have, I'd never had thought of this before, but this is a really good insight that this obviously would have really upset Brennan because this was his program. And if you look at, Trump coming into office, he's saying, what are we doing in Syria? And this is one of the few good things that Donald Trump has done since taking office was ending this program. And so I'll also link to the interview with Mehdi Hassan where he asked Flynn about this on, I think it was like Al Jazeera TV at the time. And, Flynn says, yeah, I said something about it and nobody listened.
Right. And that memo is aimed directly at Brennan and the Obama administration. And for his producing material like that, Flynn was fired. And so you got to think the fact that Flynn is a prominent, has a speech during the Republican convention attacking Hillary Clinton, who is John Brennan's patron. It's almost a proxy battle, right? John Brennan's patron is Hillary Clinton in the Obama administration, and Mike Flynn's patron is Donald Trump. And I think when Brennan sees this opportunity to kneecap one of his political enemies who helped screw him up in Syria and expose him and fought him on it, it's hard to believe he wouldn't take that shot, knowing that he is the vindictive SOB we all know John Brennan is.
And the other thing that you should remember, throughout Russiagate, a timeline that shows you with sort of everything that's happening, you have to think about things that are happening in context. And what's happening in September and October in Syria is that the Syrian army, the Russian Air Force, and the various allied coalition, they're going to take back Aleppo. And they've started. They've started to take back Aleppo. And if you recall what a devastating thing this was for all of the regime change supporters, I mean, it was huge. It was a turning point.
Right. It was when they realized that Assad was likely going to prevail in the Syrian civil war.
And this is all happening in September and October. And in the summer, obviously the preparations are being made. And, I find that to be very significant too.
And that's where we'll wrap up this episode of the show. As I said on yesterday's show, this was just a big, long conversation that we had that I broke up into 3 episodes. Let me know what you think about that. If you'd rather just have one, big 2-hour-long episode, we could certainly do that as well. But I figured this is a way to stick to the Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. If you want the full interview right away, you could do that by going to patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus and donating to the show. And there you could download the full interview without waiting until Friday to get the last piece of that. You can find the show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com and libertarianinstitute.org. You can find me on Twitter at KYAAALE, and Facebook is Libertarian Union. And then my personal news website is immersionnews.com. And then the YouTube pages are Immersion News, and that's the name of the BitChute page as well. And again, a special thanks to the guests on the show, co-host of the Around the Empire podcast, Joanne and Dan Wright. And you can find the show at aroundtheempire.com.